The door was already open when I pulled up, not the front door, the side door to the workshop, the one that faced the alley behind my son's property. It was hanging half open at 6:14 in the morning, and something about that felt wrong before I even stepped out of my truck. I was 63 years old that November, retired from the post office after 31 years. My wife June had passed 14 months earlier from pancreatic cancer, and I was still living in the half-empty house we'd shared in Decatur, Illinois, moving through rooms that felt too big and too quiet. My son Kevin had asked me to come down to Springfield for Thanksgiving week, help him fix the gutters on the workshop, maybe stay a few days extra. I hadn't had a reason to say no. I arrived a day early, didn't call ahead. Kevin worked long hours at the warehouse, and I figured I'd get settled, maybe start on those gutters myself. His truck wasn't in the driveway. His wife Linda's minivan was. Their daughter Maisie was there too. She was 9, same age. She'd always been in my heart, even though time kept moving. My only grandchild. The open door didn't make sense. Kevin never left that workshop unlocked. He kept his tools in there, his dad's old hand drill, a riding mower he'd spent 2 summers restoring. He was particular about it. I walked toward it anyway. The smell hit me about 4 feet from the door, not something rotten. Something cold and stale, like a space that had been sealed and unsealed. Chemical, faint, wrong. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. Maisie was sitting in the corner of the workshop on a folding chair, both arms wrapped around herself, wearing pajamas with cartoon foxes on them. No shoes. She was rocking slightly. Her eyes found me, and she didn't say a word. Just started crying without sound, the way children do when they've been crying so long they've run out of sound. I crossed the workshop floor in about 3 steps. "Maisie, what happened? Who did this?" She shook her head. Couldn't speak. I pulled off my jacket and wrapped it around her. Her skin was cold in the way that takes more than a few minutes to get that cold. She pointed. I looked where she was pointing. Against the back wall of the workshop, beside Kevin's workbench, there was a chest freezer. Old, white, the kind that chest freezers always were. It wasn't the one I remembered. Kevin had an upright freezer in the garage for deer meat from hunting season. This one was different, wider, older. The lid was sitting open about 2 inches. Something was propped against the latch from the outside, a piece of wood wedged under the handle. I went to Maisie first. I picked her up, carried her to the truck, started the engine, and turned the heat all the way up. My hands were shaking in a way I couldn't explain yet. I told her to lock the doors. She nodded. She still hadn't spoken. I walked back to the workshop. I stood in front of that freezer for a long moment. The wood wedge was deliberate. Someone had propped it so the lid stayed open just enough to let air in, just enough so that whoever was inside didn't suffocate. I lifted the lid the rest of the way. Linda was curled on her side at the bottom, unconscious. She was dressed in the same clothes she'd been wearing in the photo Kevin sent me last week, the green fleece she wore around the house. Her lips were pale. Her breathing was shallow and slow and wrong. I called 911 before I finished processing what I was seeing. My daughter-in-law was in the chest freezer in the workshop. She was breathing but unconscious. The address was 1804 Carver Mill Road, Springfield. I needed an ambulance. Now. The dispatcher told me not to move her. I didn't listen. I got her out of the freezer as carefully as I could, laid her on the workshop floor, and put my jacket over her because I'd already left it with Maisie. I went back to the truck, got the emergency blanket I kept under the back seat, old habit from 20 years of driving mail routes in Illinois winter, and wrapped it around Linda. Her temperature at the hospital was 89.4 degrees. Normal is 98.6. Below 95 quinaclinum 6. Below 95 is hypothermia. The ER doctor told me she'd been in there long enough that another hour without airflow would have been fatal. The piece of wood that kept the lid cracked open had saved her life. Maisie had put it there. My 9-year-old granddaughter had found her mother locked in a freezer, had found a way to make sure she could still breathe, and then had sat down on that folding chair in the cold to wait for someone to come. She waited 6 hours. I found out later that she tried to call Kevin on Linda's phone but couldn't get through. She tried to call 911, but Linda's phone required a passcode she didn't know. She banged on neighbors' doors at 6 in the morning, but no one on that stretch of road answered. So she sat down and she waited, and she kept her mother alive the only way she knew how. I am 63 years old, and I have never felt so many things at once in my life. Kevin got to the hospital about 40 minutes after the ambulance. He'd been unreachable because his supervisor had confiscated phones on the warehouse floor that morning, some new policy. He walked through those ER doors and saw his daughter in a hospital bed with a warming blanket and an IV line, and his face did something I won't be able to describe accurately. He looked at me. I pointed to Linda's room. He went. I stayed with Maisie. A police officer came to the waiting room about an hour in. Late 40s, close-cropped gray hair, the kind of calm that comes from years of seeing things that should break you. Detective Carol Briggs. She sat down across from me with a notepad and a coffee she'd bought from the vending machine. Mr. Aldridge. Tell me what you found when you arrived this morning. I walked her through it. The open door, the smell, Maisie in the corner, the freezer, the piece of wood. She wrote everything down without reaction, the way detectives do. Do you know of anyone who would want to harm your daughter-in-law? I said I didn't. I said I'd only been in Springfield twice before, that I lived up in Decatur, that I didn't know Linda's day-to-day life the way I should have. What about the freezer itself? When did it appear in the workshop? I told her I didn't recognize it. Kevin's workshop had a chest freezer, but it was smaller and it lived in the garage, not the workshop. This one was different. She nodded slowly. Then she asked, "Does your son have any siblings? Family members who visit regularly?" I told her about Kevin's sister Denise. Denise was 58, Kevin's older sister by 4 years. She'd never left Springfield, never married, lived in the house she grew up in about 6 miles from Kevin's place. She and Kevin were close in the way that adult siblings sometimes are. Regular dinners, holidays together. She babysat Maisie sometimes when Linda needed help. I'd always found her a little intense, particular about things. Particular about Kevin especially, about how he ran his household, about Linda, about Maisie. I dismissed it as the protective older sibling thing and moved on. Detective Briggs looked at her notepad. She wrote something. Then she asked, "Has your daughter-in-law ever mentioned any conflict with her sister-in-law?" That was the question I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was, I'd heard things. Not directly. Fragments that came to me through Kevin during phone calls over the past 2 years. Linda had asked Kevin to set some limits with Denise about unannounced visits. Denise had opinions about how Maisie was being raised. Too permissive, too much screen time, not enough structure. She'd told Kevin once that Linda wasn't the right kind of mother. He'd told me that and laughed it off. I'd laughed it off too. I told Detective Briggs all of it. She wrote it down and asked me to stay available. Kevin came out of Linda's room about 2 hours later. He sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a long time. Maisie was sleeping in the bed beside Linda, the two of them tucked under warming blankets. The nurses had let that happen. Sometimes medical staff understand that closeness is its own kind of medicine. Dad. Kevin's voice was flat in the way that men's voices get when they're holding everything back at once. What happened? I told him what I'd seen. The workshop, the freezer, Maisie on the chair. He already knew most of it from the detective, but hearing it from me did something different to his face. Denise's car was caught on a traffic camera on Carver Mill Road at 11:42 the previous night. That was what Detective Briggs told Kevin when she came back at noon. The workshop showed signs of forced entry through a window on the north side. The chest freezer had been registered to a storage unit rental in Denise's name. She'd been paying the rental fees for 4 years. She'd transported it to Kevin's workshop sometime in the previous week. The storage unit itself had been opened and searched. Inside, police found documents, old letters, photographs, evidence of something that had started long before any of us knew to look. Let me tell you about Denise. Kevin and I talked for a long time that night in the hospital cafeteria after Linda was stabilized and Maisie was asleep. He told me things he'd never said directly, things I think he'd been organizing in his mind for years, but hadn't put into words. Denise had always been the one in charge. That was how he described it. Even when they were kids, growing up on Carver Mill Road. Different house, same stretch of road, which I found chilling later. She was the one who managed things. Their mother Rosalie had been sick for most of their childhood, lupus that kept her bedridden for months at a time. Their father Norman had worked double shifts at the grain elevator and wasn't home much. Denise had stepped in. Cooked, cleaned, managed Kevin's schedule, made sure he got to school. She was 12 when she started doing most of it, 14 when she basically ran the household. Kevin said he'd never thought of it as a burden she resented. He'd thought of it as just the way things were. Denise was capable. Denise was in charge. What he didn't tell me, what he maybe didn't fully see until now, was that Denise had never stopped being in charge of Kevin. Even after he grew up, married Linda, bought his own house, had his own daughter, Denise still had opinions about how all of it should run. And when things ran differently than she thought they should, she didn't hide it. The friction with Linda had been building for 7 years. In the storage unit, along with the freezer documents, police found a notebook, not a journal exactly, more like a log. Dates, incidents, notes in Denise's handwriting, things she'd observed at Kevin's house. Times Linda had been short with Maisie. Times the house had been messy when Denise visited. A birthday party where the cake wasn't homemade. A school pickup where Linda was 12 minutes late. 12 minutes. She'd written it down. The last entry in the notebook was dated 3 weeks before that November morning. It said, "Maisie deserves better. Kevin can't see it because he's too close. Someone has to do something. Someone has to do something." Denise was arrested at her home at 2:17 that afternoon. She didn't run, didn't seem surprised. When the officers came to the door, she was sitting at her kitchen table drinking coffee. According to the arrest report, when they told her what she was being charged with, she said, "Linda was neglecting that child. I was trying to fix it." She said it like it was obvious, like it was the only reasonable conclusion. Kevin called me from outside the hospital when he got the news. I could hear him trying to hold his voice level and not quite managing it. He said, "Dad, she put Linda in a freezer." "I know, son. She put my wife in a freezer because she thought Linda wasn't a good enough mother. She brought a chest freezer to my workshop, and she put my wife in it. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't really. I said, 'I know.'" Kevin said, "How did I not see this?" That's the question that stays with you, not the what. The how did I not see? Linda spent 4 days in the hospital. Hypothermia recovery is slow. The body has to warm carefully, monitored, no shortcuts. She had mild frostbite on 2 fingers of her left hand. She had a contusion on the back of her head, consistent with having been struck, which explained why she'd been unconscious and unable to fight back. The medical examiner would later confirm it matched a cast iron doorstop from Kevin's own workshop. She remembered very little of the night. She remembered putting Maisie to bed. She remembered hearing a noise from the workshop, thinking Kevin had come home early. She remembered going to check. She didn't remember anything after the doorstop. Maisie remembered all of it. She'd heard the noise too, had come downstairs and looked through the kitchen window into the workshop, the way kids do when they're supposed to be asleep and something interesting is happening. She'd seen Aunt Denise. She'd seen her mother on the floor. She'd watched Denise struggle with the freezer lid and then go still and then leave. She'd been 9 years old, standing in her fox pajamas at the kitchen window, watching her aunt lock her mother in a chest freezer at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She'd gotten the piece of wood from Kevin's workbench. I keep coming back to that, 9 years old. She had never been taught that. Never been told, if your mother is locked in a freezer, here is what you do. She figured it out on her own because she was thinking about her mother being able to breathe, and she found a way to make that happen, and then she sat down and waited. Maisie gave her statement to a child specialist at the Family Advocacy Center downtown. Kevin and I sat outside in plastic chairs for 2 hours while it happened. We didn't talk much. The coffee from the machine down the hall tasted like hot water with good intentions. I drank 3 cups anyway. When it was over, Maisie came out and climbed into Kevin's lap even though she was 9 and technically too big for that. He held her like she was 2. I looked away for a minute. Some moments aren't yours to witness. The investigation took 6 weeks to complete. Detective Briggs kept Kevin informed through most of it, and Kevin kept me informed on the phone from Decatur. I drilled down twice during that period. The gutters never got fixed. I didn't bring it up. What the investigation found was this. The chest freezer had been in Denise's storage unit for 4 years, not 4 months. 4 years. She'd rented the unit in the fall of 2020, about 6 months after Kevin and Linda's marriage hit a rough patch that Denise had apparently decided was Linda's fault. She'd transported the freezer there herself, paid the rental fees in cash, and kept it there like a contingency plan for a problem she decided was going to need solving eventually. A contingency plan. That was the phrase Detective Briggs used when she explained it to Kevin. A contingency plan. Denise hadn't acted on impulse. She'd been thinking about this for 4 years. The notebook went back further than the storage unit. Entries from 2018, 2019, all the way through to that November. Years of observations, criticisms, quiet, escalating certainty that Linda was the obstacle between Kevin and the life Denise had decided he should have. No evidence of violence prior to that night. Just years of watching and documenting and deciding until the deciding became doing. The prosecutor's office charged Denise with attempted murder, first-degree assault, kidnapping, and unlawful restraint. Her defense attorney argued temporary insanity. The psychiatrist brought in for evaluation disagreed. What he found was not temporary, and it was not insanity in the legal sense. It was a long, structured, deeply private system of beliefs about her right to make decisions for her brother, about family loyalty as a hierarchy with herself at the top, about Linda as an outsider who had disrupted a system Denise had spent her whole life maintaining. Children in these systems, he testified, are often seen as extensions of the approved family member rather than independent people. Meaning, Denise didn't see Maisie as Kevin's daughter. She saw Maisie as Kevin's child, which in her framework meant Denise's responsibility, because Kevin was Denise's to protect, and everyone connected to Kevin was therefore subject to her judgment. The jury deliberated 3 days. I drove down for the verdict, sat in the back of the courtroom next to Linda's sister, a woman from Bloomington I'd met once at Christmas, and now felt like I'd known forever because of what we'd both been sitting with. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Denise to 22 years. She was 58. She'd be 80 years old before she was eligible for parole. She looked at Kevin when the sentence was read. He didn't look back. The drive back to Decatur from Springfield is about an hour on I-72. I've made it dozens of times. It's flat and straight, the kind of Illinois highway that gives you too much time to think. I made it alone that evening because Kevin and Linda had asked me to stay for dinner, but I'd needed to drive, needed the flat, dark road and the hum of the engine. I thought about Denise in that kitchen with her coffee, waiting for the knock on the door. I thought about what it costs a person to become that certain. I'd known her for 30 years, sat at her kitchen table, eaten her pot roast, watched her put Maisie to sleep when she was an infant. I thought she was difficult. I thought she was one of those people who are better in small doses. I had never thought to look for what was underneath the difficulty. Maybe none of us do until we have to. Kevin and Linda moved out of the house on Carver Mill Road the following March. It wasn't a rushed decision. They took their time, found a place in a newer development about 4 miles east, good school district, backyard with room for a dog. They got the dog, a yellow lab named Biscuit, who is exactly what you'd expect from a yellow lab named Biscuit, relentlessly enthusiastic, vaguely confused, beloved by everyone who meets him. Maisie started seeing a therapist in December, a child trauma specialist out of Springfield, who Kevin said was one of the best in central Illinois. They've been going weekly, then bi-weekly, for over a year now. I asked Kevin about it on our Sunday calls. He says Maisie is doing well. He says she still sometimes gets quiet and goes somewhere inside herself that nobody else can reach, but that it happens less now. He says her therapist calls it processing, and that processing takes as long as it takes. Maisie told me something last summer. We were sitting on Kevin's back porch, the two of us, watching Biscuit attempt to catch a firefly, with zero strategy and maximum commitment. She was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Grandpa, did I do the right thing with the wood?" I told her she did exactly the right thing. I told her she was one of the bravest people I'd ever known, and I'd known some brave people in 63 years. She thought about that for a second. She said, "I was scared the whole time." I said, "That's what brave is, sweetheart. Scared the whole time." I said, "That's what brave is, sweetheart. Scared and doing it anyway." She nodded like she was filing that away for later. Kids do that. They collect things, you say, and take them somewhere quiet to think about it. I should tell you about Linda, because this story isn't just about what happened to her. It's about who she was before and who she had to become after, and the distance between those two things. Linda was 41. She'd worked as an office manager at an orthopedic clinic for 12 years, the kind of competent, steady person that places like that run on without ever fully acknowledging. She coached Maisie's soccer team on Saturday mornings. She made Kevin's lunch every day and put a note in it, which Kevin told me about, once in a tone that made clear he thought it was a little embarrassing and also that it was one of his favorite things about his life. She came home from the hospital on a Wednesday. Mild frostbite in the fingers, some nerve sensitivity that the doctor said might take months to fully resolve, bruising from the fall. But she walked out. She drove herself to Maisie's school pickup the following Monday because she said she needed to see the ordinary things. Kevin told me later that there was a period of about 3 months where Linda had trouble sleeping, where she'd get up at 2 in the morning and check the locks on all the doors, check on Maisie, come back to bed and lie awake until it got light, where she'd be fine, and then hear a sound from outside and be somewhere else entirely for a few minutes. That faded. Not all at once, but it faded. What stayed was something harder to name. Linda had always been warm, open, the kind of person who fills a room without trying. After that November, she was still those things, but there was a layer underneath now that hadn't been there before. Awareness, maybe. A knowledge that the people who move through your ordinary life carry things you cannot see, and that sometimes those things are dangerous, and that ordinary is not the same as safe. I don't think that's a bad thing to know. I think it's one of the true things. I'm 64 now. Still in the house in Decatur. Still too big, still too quiet. I've started keeping a photo of June on the nightstand instead of in the drawer where I put it after the funeral, because it hurt too much to look at. 14 months of the drawer. Then I took it out. She would have called me an idiot for that. I drive down to Springfield most months now. Fixed the gutters finally last spring, Kevin and I up on the ladder in March complaining about the cold like we'd always done that. Stayed for a week. Took Maisie to the Lincoln Museum downtown, which she pronounced interesting, the way 9-year-olds who are being polite about something that hasn't grabbed them say interesting. We got ice cream after, and she told me about her current obsession, which is competitive dog agility, and whether Biscuit could be trained for it, which the answer is probably no, but I didn't say that. I've thought a lot about what I want to say at the end of this. I'm not a man who gives speeches. Spent 31 years delivering other people's mail, then came home to June and we ate dinner and watched the news, and that was a life, and it was a good one. I'm not naturally inclined to lessons, but here is what I know. I almost didn't drive down that Tuesday. Kevin had called Sunday and said he'd leave the side door unlocked, that I could come whenever. I thought about coming Wednesday instead. I was tired from the drive, tired the way you get at 63 when tired has a different quality than it did at 40. I sat in my kitchen in Decatur Monday night, thinking about whether I really needed to be there Tuesday or whether I could wait. I went Tuesday. I don't know what would have happened if I'd waited. Maybe Linda would have woken up on her own. Maybe a neighbor would have finally answered Maisie's knock. Maybe the piece of wood would have held long enough. I don't know. The doctor said another hour without airflow would have been fatal. And I arrived at 6014 and I don't know what time the airflow would have run out. And I don't want to calculate it. What I know is that Maisie sat alone for 6 hours in the cold and didn't give up. She found what she could find and she used it. She was 9 years old and she didn't know what to do, and she did something anyway. There are people in your life right now who are sitting on a folding chair in a cold room, holding on, hoping someone is going to come through the door. They might not be able to tell you that. They might not have words for it, or the words might be in a look they give you when you ask how they're doing, and they say, "Fine." They might be the child who's been having nightmares, the neighbor who stops coming outside, the person at the family dinner who goes quiet when a certain name comes up. Pay attention. Show up a day early. Answer the door at 6 in the morning. I know it sounds simple. It is simple. It's also the hardest thing. Maisie is 10 now. She started 4th grade in September. Same school, different class. She has a best friend named Zoe who comes over every Friday and stays until Linda has to drive her home at 9 o'clock, which is later than the agreed upon time, but nobody enforces it very hard. She has decided that Biscuit is going to compete in agility trials regardless of his aptitude for it, and she has recruited Kevin into this project. Kevin sent me a video of the two of them in the backyard with a makeshift course of hula hoops and Biscuit running directly through 2 of the 3. She's working on it. She's working on it. That's what I've got for you. That's the whole thing. My granddaughter is 10 years old, and she is working on it, and she is going to be fine, and I'm going to keep driving down to Springfield on the first Tuesday of every month to make sure she knows that someone is always coming through the door. Thanks for being here. If this story landed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who's sitting on a folding chair somewhere, waiting for someone to show up. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since that November morning. Not in any grand philosophical way. I'm a retired mail carrier from Decatur, not a professor, but in the plain, practical way that comes when you realize how many small decisions stacked up to produce one enormous outcome. Denise didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt Linda. She woke up every day for years and decided quietly and privately that her judgment mattered more than anyone else's, that her love for Kevin gave her authority over his life, that caring deeply about someone is the same thing as being right about them. Those decisions accumulated the way ice accumulates, so gradually you don't notice the weight until something breaks. That's the part that stays with me. Not the freezer, not even the 6 hours Maisie sat alone in the cold. It's the notebook, years of entries, a person who confused devotion with ownership and never once stopped to question whether those two things were the same. I think about the choices I made too, the times I noticed something off about Denise and filed it under difficult personality and moved on. The times Kevin mentioned friction, and I said something mild and reassuring and changed the subject. I wasn't cruel, I wasn't negligent, I was just comfortable, the way people get comfortable when nothing has gone badly wrong yet. Comfort is not the same as paying attention. Maisie is the one who taught me that, not with a speech, with a piece of wood from a workbench. She was 9 years old and she didn't have the tools she needed, and she used what she had anyway. That's not a small thing. Most adults, facing something that overwhelming, go still. They freeze, and I mean that in the most literal sense. Maisie didn't. She assessed what was in front of her and she acted on what she knew, which was that her mother needed air, and she found a way to make that happen. Then she sat down and she held on. There's a word for that, and the word is integrity. Not the formal version, not the version that lives in speeches and award plaques, the real version, the version that means when everything falls apart and nobody is watching and there are no instructions, you still do the thing that needs to be done. You do it scared. You do it without any guarantee that it will work. You do it because the alternative is doing nothing, and doing nothing is not something you're willing to be. I want to be that kind of person. I'm 64 years old and I'm still working on it. What I know for certain is this: the choices we make in ordinary time, whether to show up a day early, whether to pay attention when something feels wrong, whether to drive down on a Tuesday when we could wait until Wednesday, those choices are not small. They look small, they feel small, but they are the entire thing. Linda is back coaching soccer on Saturday mornings. Maisie is training Biscuit for agility trials with a patience that neither the dog nor the obstacle course deserves. Kevin puts a note in his own lunch now because Linda started leaving them for him and he decided he liked the habit. Ordinary things. Ordinary and irreplaceable. If you're watching this and something in it landed with you, the part about the notebook, the part about comfort, the part about a 9-year-old on a folding chair, carry that with you. Not as a lesson, as a reminder. The people in your life are worth showing up for before the emergency. Show up now. Pay attention now. That's the whole thing.